Hey there, you're listening to the EmpowerTech Podcast with Iyari. This podcast is where we discuss all things tech and explore the growing ways in how we can leverage technology to lead smart, sustainable, and impactful lives. On this episode, Cynthia and I will dive into why she got into seeing more girls in tech, how parents can influence the trends, and how other countries do it. Also, the challenges that teachers face. Cynthia has a Master's in Career Management from the University of London, a Bachelor's degree in IT from QUT, and she's also a QCT registered secondary teacher, specialising in digital solutions, ICT design and digital technology. With a passion about growing career opportunities in technology and inspiring school students, we're really excited to have her with us. Hi, Cynthia, welcome.
Hi, Iyari. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's really exciting to have you here. And look, let's get started on what got you into seeing more girls in tech.
Yeah. Well, I think like a lot of people, when you're starting out in your career, you start noticing that it's just so male dominated. I remember being at QUT and just being in a lecture theatre, and there was 300 boys and about 3 girls. And I remember thinking, this is in the 90s, thinking this is ridiculous. And of course, over the years, it hasn't really changed much. So that has motivated me over the years to see if we can keep pushing for women and girls to pursue a career in tech. 'Cause it's a wonderful career. There's so many options. And I'm frustrated that we don't have enough girls seeing the benefits and really enjoying it.
Yeah, wow, okay. Must have been quite an experience being in a room with not many girls in the room. And do you think in terms of, where we're catching girls at the moment, where is the best place to catch them to get some enthusiasm around STEM?
So you're quite right, Iyari, about it being a really odd and interesting situation. Firstly, I remember going into lecture theatres and tutorial groups, and I wasn't being looked at as an equal. I was really being looked at as dating potential, which was quite insulting, really.
Good and bad.
Yeah, well, admittedly, early 20s, you're doing the same, but, I had a lot more choice. Yeah. However, to sort of come back to your second question, and a really important one, is at what point should we be encouraging girls to get into tech as a career pathway? And I've done an insane amount of studying in this area, and I actually now really believe that it should be earlier in their school life. I'm actually now really keen on working with primary students and primary girls, especially around the probably year 5 and 6, so the ages of 10 and 11. They tend to be not as, subjected to the inequality and the gender bias at this stage. So if they're interested in tech, they'll actually really go for it and not worry about the dominance of male. And also hormones are in a much more balanced state at that age. And peer group pressure isn't as bad. So there's a lot going for young women. And I've actually proven this when I was working within the private school sector, independent schools. And I was running a club for tech, like a lunchtime tech club, and it was open to it was in a girls' school. It was at Somerville House in Brisbane. And it was open to all girls from year 4, 5 upwards. And I had 60 girls turn up one lunchtime, and they were all year 5 and 6s, with just a couple in secondary. And they were so eager and so capable. That's the thing, right? We assume that young people can't do this, but they were just doing amazingly well. They were programming, they were doing cybersecurity. So I think we should start early.
Okay, yeah, I totally understand that there are several things competing for a tween or a teen in terms of, attention span. And also I think the social aspect for young girls at that point is quite strong. get in and find their group, and if they're finding themselves in classes where there might be one of only 3 or 4 girls, that will be a decision-making process for them. So year 5, so 10 to 11 sounds like a good age. So in terms of what you're doing right now, you've just mentioned a couple of programs there. What are the sorts of things that we're sort of trying to get enthusiasm or girls into at the moment?
I suppose this is a two-pronged answer, really, because there are a lot of outreach programs that really do help and enable young girls to enter into STEM. Quite often tech is referred to as STEM. But what we have found, and I'm sure you've noticed this as well, is that a lot of the funding has dried up for a lot of the outreach programs. And so there are some amazing outreach programs which enabled young women to, or, tweens, I suppose, to start embarking on the STEM area, like on school holidays or after school clubs, etc. And now there's no funding, so these clubs have literally had to close. I just saw one recently, an international event, which is Ada Lovelace Day. Massive fan of Ada Lovelace, and again, funding has dried up, and the organizer of that has said that she's not able to do this anymore. Now, when you're working with teenagers and teenage girls, you are 100% correct, Iyari, about if you are asking a 13, 14, 15-year-old girl to be the minority in a class, along with all the other things going on, and none of her friends are doing this, you have to have a lot of passion and, for the subject. And frankly, at this stage, they need to be discovering and seeing if they do have a passion for it, and just removing those barriers is super important. Also, the topic, the subject matter, depending on how it's taught, can be really dry. So I think there's a massive need and space for this outreach, all these outreach programs, because then you don't have that situation where you're with your peers, with boys, you're feeling judged. It's a safe space in that context. You can, embrace your sort of geeky self. And that's just drying up. So, we're sort of between hard and a rock place.
Hard and a rock place.
Yeah, hard and a rock place. It was correct. Yeah.
So, Cynthia, something that I just want to scratch underneath the surface on in terms of these subjects can be a little bit dry, and our potential reliance as parents on the school to make them exciting. Would you say that that's an unrealistic expectation?
Oh, gosh, is it a realistic expectation? I think the curriculum, certainly the P to 10 curriculum in the Australian curriculum version 9, has enough scope that you can actually, if you are a sort of a teacher that really can be inspiring and making it interesting, you can work with that. But equally, teachers have a lot to do. I'm a teacher as well, and, rewriting the curriculum and reworking things and keeping it interesting for everyone in your class, and that's quite a diverse range of students that you will have, isn't really realistic. Tech is one of the few subjects that with the evolution of technology at such an exponential rate, that you just need to keep updating it. Not as so in other subjects where, if I look at history, no offense to my wonderful history teachers, but history is history, so it doesn't really change, while tech just is constantly changing. So if you're teaching, assembly, the fundamentals are there, but it's not especially useful for a pathway. But so then I suppose flip side is parents do have a role to play, but parents are just possibly as intimidated by the technology sector as other teachers. So we can't assume that parents are going to be inspiring young people and girls to embrace the tech sector, because there is a fear. We're hearing it now. The fear of AI is going to make jobs redundant. The idea of people really appreciating that you just have to reskill and upskill and change and be a lifelong learner. There is a real interesting dichotomy there. So we can't rely on parents being that push. But parents have a massive influence on this sort of thing.
And just talking about parents there for a moment, do you think parents think that their children, be they girls or boys, are capable of doing these subjects? Because I've learnt recently that may also be, one of the issues that we're facing here in terms of getting more girls into tech.
That is a really good question as well. I think parents naively think that because their children have been born relatively recently, in the last sort of 15 years, that the fact that they can use mobile phones doesn't necessarily mean that they can use technology. So they are digital natives, but doesn't mean that they're digital enabled and experts and knowledgeable in that space. So sometimes you will have parents, and I've heard this many times when I work with parents in PNF groups and all sorts. Parents will go, "Oh no, they're great at tech. They teach me how to use the remote, or they teach me how to use the mobile phone." But that's not really tech, right? That's just being a user, and the fact that the technology has been developed to be user friendly for a type of generation. So I do have to regularly re-educate parents to say, well, what we're looking for is more computational thinking, being able to think in a certain way, being able to break down problems and questions and think in a more systematic way and a different way of thinking. Then oddly, parents then go, oh, okay, and now maybe they think that their child isn't that, or maybe they suddenly think, actually, my child who is maybe very good at systems thinking and problem solving and automation now suddenly has a space in tech. So it's actually a really interesting dilemma.
Okay. And going back to the teachers, they do have a lot to do. There's a lot of things that they need to get through. And so keeping up, making it exciting, that sounds like a lot of hard work for our teachers. But I'm also thinking about that career development advice that they might be giving. Like, are we asking them to do this as well?
Absolutely. So that is a major issue around encouraging young people into the tech pathway is, again, I have a huge respect for the career advisors within schools, but honestly, you might get one career advisor for 1,000 students. And so that's not a lot of resource. And this career advisor is doing set plans and just doing a huge amount of work. And they need to be across all sectors and all industries. And of course, again, the tech sector changes so quickly. So unless the career advisor per se is really into tech and really sees the opportunities, they're not going to have the latest information. So then it does fall upon the tech teacher. Now, the tech teacher, along with teaching and marking and behavior management and curriculum and, the many, many things teachers we now need to do, what we're saying is they also need to be across industry and pathways. And that's a big ask. Remembering that in this, in education, quite often they're probably teaching more than tech because, of course, we're finding that the demand from students to study technology subjects is reducing. And that's an issue on many fronts because schools are now choosing possibly to cancel subjects because they can't justify it. And then that perpetuates through a smaller pipeline. And so the sort of it keeps feeding itself almost.
Yeah. It's an ongoing problem. There's so many issues in what you've described. I'm just wondering about the government's role in all of this.
Yeah.
I learned recently that the curriculum, it's in its totality, only gets reviewed, once in a significant period of time. Is that right? Like we're looking at the curriculum as a whole every so often in terms of reviewing and updating it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the curriculum gets updated and reviewed roughly every 4 years. It gets reviewed. And of course, technology changes quite significantly within 4 years. But then the curriculum is designed to be written so it's very broad, so there's open to interpretation. That's certainly into the P to 10 stage. So that's, from up to year 10. The year 11 and 12, the senior education, that's more prescribed. and that, honestly, anyone who's taught the senior curriculum is quite dry, and is less open to interpretation because, of course, it's more of an official assessment process. So the government definitely does have a role to play here, because if we are looking to create the young people who are tech ready to create and work within a future ready, and we hear all the propaganda, we want Australia to be at the forefront of technology, and we want to create young people who are really embracing this, then teaching things that are really outdated doesn't help that cause at all. So it is. I think the government definitely has a role to play. Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the dryness of year 11 and 12 and the struggle was. I have emotional scars from that period in my life, quite some time ago now. But I guess I'm also thinking about the way that young people are consuming things now and how exciting they are, and they're in short form most of the time. There's no point thinking that these young students aren't on social media like most of them are. So that kind of delivery of information in terms of school versus what they're getting outside of school would be very, very different these days as well. So that'd be a struggle for some of the kids as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's many a documented comment that, students have the attention span of about 6 seconds. Now, that's, in my experience, that's not necessarily accurate. But saying that, gone are the times that that teachers should be using, chalk and talk. I assure you, students are just not listening. They're not learning. They're passive. It's actually really interesting. I've had many situations where I've had very experienced teachers tell me, when I was first training, a teacher told me once, if you are working harder than your students, then you've got it wrong. Which basically means your students should not be passive listening in a classroom or just writing notes or, copying down off the board. I've had students and I've seen this, where students are trying to distract the teacher with unrelated questions and discussion just so they can get away with not learning during a lesson. And to the unacquainted teacher, they might think, oh, these kids are really interested in my life. But actually, no, they're just trying to make life easy for themselves.
And learning how to manipulate.
They really are. And then literally, students are expert students. That's ultimately, they are expert at manipulating situations. Obviously I love teaching and I love being around students, and I do find it really interesting. The skills they learn are impressive because they're trying to avoid work.
Yeah, there's high motivation. And time in their lives where they learn these skills, right? So it's perfect storm for a high school.
I have to do, if I can just take this moment, I actually have found teenage students really understand VPN, right? They know VPN, not for the reasons we think regarding security and things like that. They know VPN because they can avoid the firewalls and they can avoid a whole bunch of stuff at school that stops them from using the internet. So it's impressive how students now understand extensions on their browsers so they can get access to games, and they totally get VPNs and they know which ones are the free ones.
My kids' iPads, my devices, I'm starting to feel like I'm being left behind by the savviness of some of these kids with their motivation.
Indeed. And in fact, I actually, when I was teaching in England, it goes to year 13. So, and if you're teaching computer science, it goes to year 13. And honestly, these students are pretty amazing. And A-levels in England, you only do 3 subjects, right? So you can do a deep dive, unlike in Australia where you're doing 5 or 6. And you get to that point, and one of the things you would do is talk to the tech department within a school. And I used to arrange that my year 13s would try to hack the school. And it was an amazing skill. It's an amazing opportunity. It's amazing for the school because, of course, you can, do white hat. And it's great for the students because they're learning in real life about, how they can hack and whether they're hacking from outside the school or hacking within the school, all the different levels. And it's exciting, right? A student hacking into the school system. How exciting is that? So, yeah.
Yeah. And they can get a badge of honour. They can, talk to their friends about it. That would be an amazing experience in terms of an engaging subject, right? And something they can take on into the real world and really understand. What a great project.
Indeed. It is, like when you're teaching networks, you don't need to draw a network. You can literally look at the room you're in and go, right, see that? That's a network box. This is it. And unplug things and go, see, now you can't access the internet. And, and the moment you start doing that and bringing it back into the house so students can understand, what's their router at home? What's happening at home? Why is when you buy memory sticks or you buy RAM, it's in certain numbers, like 64 to, all the binary numbers, right? They don't understand that. I had a student go, why do they do these numbers? Like, why are they always even numbers? So then I explained how it all works. And now suddenly there's an interest in the concept of binary, but it's also useful. So we just got to keep making it relevant and useful. Then when it comes to engaging with young people, and research has definitely shown, and I have papers, that I've written on this, that with girls, if we take it back to girls need to understand the bigger picture as to why we are learning the tech. Boys love to tinker. So they will mess about. They have no issue failing. They get it wrong. They'll do it again. They'll try and they'll tinker. Girls, need to have the 110%. They need to know that they can do this before they even try. But also they need to know that what they're doing has a bigger purpose. It doesn't have to be like save the whales or anything, but it just needs to have a bigger context as to what's the benefit. And bringing it back to the home helps in that way.
Yeah, no, perfect. I'm starting to think about what I might be saying to my kids around this. And I can definitely understand that the boys are the tinkerers. And I just never really thought about, girls wanting to understand that higher purpose to what it is that they're doing, which gives them that connection to the work. In terms of parents like me, where else should parents start with this? You mentioned all the way up to year 5 through high school. What should we be thinking about in terms of potentially creating those conversations where we're trying to understand if this is something that they want to do and giving them, the language or experiences? Where should parents start?
Yeah, I think we should be. And I think we should start the conversation really early, but don't focus specifically on the technology, because of course the technology they're using now and they'll use in year 5 is going to be insanely different to what they're going to be using when they graduate, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to be so different. 8 years, 10 years from now, what is standard is not going to be standard then. And it changes so quickly. So instead of talking about the tech, I would talk about the problem solving and the creative thinking and the lateral thinking. So I recently ran a program with a school in Logan, actually, and I was promoting the whole concept of creative thinking. And I had these students, I literally had 30 toilet rolls, the center of a toilet roll, the cardboard thing. And I gave them a requirement. I said, right, you need to build the biggest tower and it has to be self-standing and the tallest tower wins. And so them just thinking about how to do this, and this is literally a cardboard roll tower, is wonderful because they start thinking in different ways. They start looking at the properties of the item. They start working ideally as a team. So if you've got more than one child, then maybe working as, with siblings. That's a really important skill. Being able to stand back and think, okay, how are we going to solve this? What are the requirements? What are the things I can do and I can't do? That is what's going to prepare young people for a tech-enabled and tech-dominant future. So for parents, I would do problem solving. That is a big one. And if you are into tech and automation, then bring some of that in, by all means. But don't focus on the technology. Don't focus on the tools. Focus on the thinking.
Okay. And in terms of speaking to the schools, like how do we understand where the schools are at in terms of teaching technology? Should we be getting on the PNC? Like how, if there are some really passionate parents out there, what would you advise them to do in terms of schools?
Yeah, there are many things you can do. I would encourage involvement in the PNCs and the PNFs because actually what parents need to realise is these groups have a voice within the senior leadership within a school. So they do have a voice, and they do so much more than fundraising. It's so much more than that. And if you have parents talking about how can we enable more tech and future ready our young people, they will listen to that, and then they have a voice further up in the school setting. So that I recommend that. I also recommend reaching out to the head of subject. The head of the actual subject in tech. Now, that can be a little bit flawed because sometimes tech is part of a much bigger subject, and the head of the bigger subject may not have any interest whatsoever in tech. And that's really sad. And in fact, what I've noticed is schools that are successful in encouraging more and more students into this pathway is where the subject is standalone and isn't part of a wider subject, where it's not part of, say, business, or it's not part of the wider technologies, which includes industrial tech and food tech, and so it needs to be on its own, and then it has a seat at the table when you start talking about head of departments. It needs to be taken more seriously. So talk to the HODs, talk to the teacher. They all can be emailed. You can get access to them. If you have access to the director of innovation, most schools now have someone who is sort of that director of innovation or the head of innovation or the STEM head. They go by so many names. They are very good at being able to enable things to happen. And it may not be through curriculum, but it could be through lunchtime or extracurriculum activity. I would say, word of warning, don't think that robotics is the only option. A lot of schools say, oh, we've got a robotics club. Robotics is such a small part of tech, and it is so specific, and it attracts a certain type of person. And so don't just accept that, oh, we've got robotics, that's great, and we're done.
Box tick. I don't remember having innovation heads of or allocated people at my school for that. What's brought that about?
Yeah, it is a relatively new thing. It's probably been around now, the more progressive schools, probably since about 2018. And certainly when COVID hit, that it boomed significantly. And so it was all born out of having automation within schools. So things like learning management systems, LMSs, whether it's Canvas or QLearn or Schoolbox or Firefly or whatever it is. So what schools realized is that they needed someone who was tech savvy, but also very fluent in education and pedagogy. So this is where that role was born. And so they became that person that sort of bridged the gap between the tech department, the internal tech department, and teachers. And then that morphed more and more. Certainly as COVID hit, then that was all about remote teaching and learning. And then, of course, with the term STEM, so then it became much more about collaboration. And then now you see there's a lot of building happening within schools. that is referred to as like the innovation building or the STEM building or the precinct. These are all sort of terms you see, and schools are investing a significant amount of money in these buildings. And so typically that same person is involved in that. So yeah, it is really new. It's a really new role. And I've seen it done really so well and successfully. And other times I've seen it not as successfully done. But they do have a voice, and they're usually part of the SLT team, so senior leadership team. So I think it is well worth parents to reach out to that person and understand more fully what's happening for the students.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. Look, I want to take a different angle, Cynthia, in terms of, where we're at with this problem. I want to understand if we're the only ones struggling in Australia with this gender equity and tech issue. What do you know about what other countries are doing, not doing, where we are in terms of, I don't know if there's rankings around this, but how are we doing compared to other countries?
So if we look at the bigger picture and start looking at other countries, Australia is pretty much average with, we're sort of tracking with other countries quite sort of at a standard level. If we start looking at how many women are employed within the tech sector, it's around the 30% mark. And when you start looking, though, at the engagement at the school level, in order to get that 30%, you do need a fairly substantial pipeline, and we're not there. Now, with my research, what I have found is in Southeast Asia, places like Singapore, they have a huge level of girls' engagement in tech. It's amazing. It's actually more dominant to have females than males.
Oh, wow.
It's wonderful. Now, I have reached out to some different institutions within Singapore, and also Singapore, and you have Malaysia and a few other neighbouring countries that are also very high female tech savvy. And a lot of this comes from starting very young. It also stems from a sense that it is not a gender thing. It's not, there is no gender dominance. And interestingly, when you start thinking about history and how technology have actually evolved, it was the women who were doing all the technology. So you don't have to think that far back than to think, Katherine Johnson, she was the computer, right? She was one of the people who was the computer. And Ada Lovelace and all these wonderful women. But then things changed, and suddenly there was a sense of, this is quite important stuff. And that's where the sort of dominance of males came over. I have heard, and, I don't have an opinion on this, but I have heard that in certain cultures, technology is seen to be a lesser job, not as, influential. Okay. And therefore women are being promoted to go into that because they're not as powerful. I know. I'm with you, Iyari. Honestly, I cannot, you can't win, right? You can't win. You go one way and yeah. So I have heard that. I don't know how true that is, but I have heard that from a couple of people who've said that. Now, I think, I may have said in different forums, I'm quite a fan of changing up the narrative, and let's not just think about the equipment and the technology. Let's look at the bigger picture. But why aren't we doing more work around quantum computing in schools? That ultimately is where we can see the future being. And actually, I think this is an amazing opportunity for much more gender equality around quantum, because there isn't the stigma of tinkering. There isn't the stigma of, just wires and, all of those things that were very dominant male. And in fact, I was speaking with various people involved in quantum, and they are seeing more women in that sector. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to redefine the balance of who is involved with quantum computing, because it doesn't have that history of, buying the magazine and having the program in the back of the magazine and doing all of these things that was really prominent in the 80s and 90s. Now, quantum, at this stage, we don't have a quantum computer in our house, right? So you can't really tinker. It's not that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it does include a much wider knowledge base. You know, it has the physics, it has the science, it has the chemistry, not chemistry, sorry, it has the maths. So I think it's a real opportunity for us to redefine what it looks like.
Are any of our science teachers talking about quantum yet?
I know in Western Australia, there is a group of teachers who are promoting quantum physics within Western Australia, and Western Australia tends to be quite progressive in this space. I had the privilege of flying over to Western Australia and presenting around immersive technologies such as VR and XR with Meta and various other colleagues. And they were very much embracing this. So there is a little bit of this, but actually, is it science? Can it be maths? Can it be tech? Can this be the opportunity for cross-curriculum where, you know, this is the holy grail in education. If you can help a child learn and all the subjects are touching the same concept but are looking at it like a bit of a mirror ball, right? You're looking at the mirror ball from different angles, then their learning becomes deeper and the connections happen better. Things make sense.
Wow. What an opportunity.
I think so. You know, I really do.
Quantum? You're getting me excited about this.
Indeed. Well, you know, I've started writing a curriculum actually starting from year 5, right? There is no reason why we don't start at year 5. Yes, of course, you know, quantum physics is complex, but we can start by talking about non-binary. Heck, the students are already talking about non-binary in the land of gender, right? So we can embrace that concept already and talk about how in quantum computing, you know, the superposition, and it's not a binary. You can bring in Schrodinger's cat and that concept, you know, so you can start with some really basic concepts, which, and, you know, year 5 and 6 can definitely handle that. So, and that gets the thinking going, you know, it gets that spark.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And look, I'm from Mexican background, and I did go to school in Mexico, and I did notice that we had our science subjects in primary school, and we were learning chemistry and physics pretty early compared to what we do here in Australia. So it's not like it is impossible. It's just bringing it back down to those basics and making it digestible, right, for kids at that age. So it's not an impossibility. And I think also what I'm hearing you say, right, is that when they're younger, kids in general, they're able to understand concepts. And, you know, if you make them simple, they can start to imagine or get excited about these things earlier on, where the magic is still kind of happening, right? And you can get them excited about these subjects in a slightly different way than that dry kind of approach that we have in the later years.
Absolutely. You know, if I look at some of the programs that some schools are doing, so some schools are actually starting to hire specialist teachers in primary. So this is specialist teachers who will specialize in tech and science, because of course it's a whole lot to ask your primary school teacher to be experts in all subjects, you know, whether it's, you know, the core subjects, so, you know, maths and English and all the other subjects, and then to expect them to also be subject specialists is quite a big ask. And so it's really wonderful to start seeing more and more roles in primary that do this. Now, not all schools have the budget for this, and this is where programs that are outreach programs, and the first one comes to mind is Girls' Day Out in STEM. That really focuses within that sort of year 5 and upwards. And there are tools online that they produce some amazing experiential things, and also excursions, and where industry, I know we haven't really talked a lot about industry, but this is where industry can involve young people as to how these skills are being used. So if I think like PowerLink, I've seen PowerLink at the Big Day Out in STEM Girls' Day Out in STEM event, and Powerlink are showing really interesting physics and chemistry and electricity, and these young girls are really embracing it. So industry have a role to play, definitely.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I want to be, again, I was saying I want to go back to school. Not sure I quite want to do that, but you're making it sound very exciting. And look, Cynthia, maybe lastly, I really want to give people, a sense of what they can do. What would your top tips be for our listeners to empower themselves in this space?
So if we're looking at what people can do, say parents, is that sort of so if we're looking
first, but I have a feeling that there's probably also professionals that don't have kids and potentially teachers too, right? So let's start with the parents.
And I think we've touched on parents quite a bit, and I think the big things that parents can do is engage in outreach programs, get students involved. Yes, parents ferry kids around to sporting events, but, I think that parents, should be including in that the sort of areas around STEM and, getting students and getting their young people involved in that way. So I think in the land of parents, keep your mind open that the future now is not going to be the future that that your kids will experience, and you've got to keep that mind open. Also, when you're having conversations with students or your children who are obviously students, don't talk about what job do you want to have. Talk about what skills do you want to learn. Focus on the skills. And then I would take that into professionals as well. As you are looking to maybe you want a career change, maybe you are wanting to make sure that you stay relevant within the work sector, the labour market, then start understanding what are the skills that you need. Now, there are many, many directories and sort of lists that government produce that talk about the top 10 skills for the next, 10 years. And always at the top of those skills are things like problem solving, critical thinking, creative thinking, communication skills, things around automation, data scientists, data analysts, those sort of roles. So look at the skill and then do some of your own learning, be a lifelong learner. Go on other days where you go to school, you go get a degree, you get a job, and that's it. That's all the learning you do. You cannot be doing that. You're constantly learning. And I'm a big fan of bite-sized learning. Like the word micro-credential gets overused, and I'm not overly worried whether it's micro-credential or otherwise, but it is about learning as you need and as you can consume knowledge. But definitely don't be blind to what's happening in the future. Keep your mind open, and just always be learning. And get involved in different associations that are within your passion as well. So I think that's the thing, isn't it, Iyari? It doesn't matter what industry you're in because tech is everywhere. So if you're, in the food industry, well, not too far in the future, there's going to be 3D printing food, right? So I know it sounds bizarre, but it is going to be.
I want the first one of those. The 1000th version, I'll taste that one.
So it doesn't matter what sector you're in. Think about how is this going to evolve over time? How are we going to be automating it? And then learn about that. I've seen 3D printed houses, right? In developing countries with concrete being pumped through. Okay. So why not 3D printed food, right? We're seeing clothes as well. So if you're into the fashion sector and whatever, clothes, and we're seeing this already now where you've got clothes that are absolutely custom made. And so you're not having a rack of clothes and then looking at the wastage there. We have to be conscious of food waste and, fabric waste and, and all of that. So keep abreast and aware of what's happening and what could happen in the future.
And what about teachers? Any teachers and top tips for them to empower themselves around this?
Yeah. I think more teachers need to talk to each other. I have worked across many schools, and there are most schools operate in a silo situation. So each department works within their own department. They have their own staff room. They might all meet together for a weekly staff meeting, but they're not talking to each other. They all tend to sit within their departments. Now, on paper, schools logically shouldn't work, right? You've got a whole bunch of hormonal kids all crammed into one place for a certain amount of years, and then you've got all these subject experts who are amazing at what they do, all thrown together, right? It just logically doesn't work. But some of the things that we can do to make it work is, like, let's embrace the stuff in between, right? In between the silos, that's where the gold is. Let's get the science department talking to the maths department, talking to the English department about, a concept that can be cross-curricular, talking to the tech department. And that's when, instead of having students experience cognitive fatigue, which we all understand in the education sector, right? Kids get tired, their brain, they stop processing. And in fact, one of the things that we do in England when you first train as a teacher is you follow a student for a week. And it is exhausting being a student. It is so exhausting. You're going from class to class to class, different teachers, different style of teaching, different information, nothing's connected. It's honestly, after a week of being at school, I needed a dark room.
Like, how did I get through this?
And this is what we're making our kids do, right? No wonder they're doing whatever they can so they're not working hard in a lesson.
What an experience. I think I would enjoy doing the walk around, but I can see how exhausting it might be, and I can recognise when my kids get home how tired they look. I'm like, you look really tired.
Yeah, well, they've experienced. Can you imagine all the different characters they've effectively had for whatever the lesson time? 6, 7 parents who are barking at them in different forms, right? Some teachers use the shouting, some teachers are chilled, whatever. But they've had effectively 7 parents at them the whole day, and then tomorrow it's going to be different. If they're in secondary, they're going to be a different group of parents, effectively. So now, everyone talks about PBL, project-based learning, as opposed to positive behaviour learning. So the phrase PBL can actually be used in 2 different ways in schools, so that can be confusing. But project-based learning, and I love that. If done well, it's awesome. But I think it actually stems back to cross-curriculum learning. If you're doing geometry in maths, then let's talk about geometry and let's do things with 3D shapes in tech. Let's look at 3D shapes in science and physics. Let's do the same thing. So now it's all connected and we understand it.
Still getting the learning, but it's more connected, and that deeper learning that you mentioned. And then I'm assuming you're also getting using less energy across the class.
Exactly, right? Exactly. Trying to have these young people not exhausted, psychologically and cognitively not exhausted, and emotionally, right? If you've ever been a teacher and you're teaching last lesson of the day, behavior is going to be horrendous. And then if you're teaching the last lesson of the week, that's even worse. And then take it another step further, the last lesson of a term, and, heading into Christmas, that last lessons in the term can be even more horrendous. And that's just, a lot of it is out of exhaustion.
Yes.
So whatever we can do to reduce that cognitive load is going to be helpful, absolutely helpful.
Yeah. Brilliant. I really love those takeaways. They're really practical. I can imagine my kids benefiting from that. So wonderful suggestion, Cynthia. Really love talking to you today. I think I'm going to be, jotting down notes on what I can do, what I should be saying to my kids. So fabulous advice. Thank you so much for talking to us today.
Indeed. Oh, you're so welcome, Iyari. I'm so pleased that you invited me on this awesome podcast. And as much as we can spread the word, that we're learning, and we're teaching our listeners bite size at a time. So thank you again. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome. Until next time. Thanks for listening today. Do keep in mind that this is a podcast for informational purposes, and all we're really doing is sharing our opinions on things that matter to us. With that being said, if you liked what you heard and want to continue supporting us, share this podcast with your network to help us grow and bring on even more guests. Until next time, this is Iyari from EmpowerTech, signing off.